so much, colleagues and students, professors, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, and thank you so much for this opportunity that I've been given to be one of the speakers at this annual winter school. This invitation is actually for me an honor, but also a challenge. As I ask myself, because I was told to think about the youth, and of course, in the country, tomorrow on June 16, we commemorate Youth Day, June 16, 1976, amongst other things. But then I asked myself whether the youth of 1976 has failed the youth of 2023. I asked myself if we as the church have not failed the youth. But I also, as a theologian, ask myself if theology or theologies have not failed the youth. So it is difficult, I think. Ms. Robertson wrote to me every week to ask for a theme, to ask for a title of my paper and my presentation. And I took a bit of time because it is kind of difficult to think of any theme in relation to youth without immersion, without face-to-face, and without reflecting on lived experiences of our youth. So I came up with quite a number of tentative titles, and then I had to at least choose one amongst them. So the other one that I thought of would be, when I look at the current situation in South Africa, I thought of youth or young adults, you are on your own. As inspired by Steve Biko's Black Men, you are on your own. And then when I was thinking about that, then I remembered when Steve Biko says, we must learn to accept that no group, however benevolent, can ever hand power to the vanquished on a plate. And then another tentative title that came to mind was a song by Letamulu, Not Yet Uhuru. And then I went to Alan Busak, who says to not be free is an antithesis to the name of Jesus, which according to him spells liberation and freedom and humanity and justice and wholeness. And then I had to choose one. Then I came across this struggle song, Kubi, Kubi, Siyaya. Noba Kubi, Siyaya. Noba Besibulala, Siyaya. No matter how bad we are going, no matter if they are killing us, we are going. And then I found a clip that I want us to just take a minute to listen to. So when to play it again? Maybe we can join. So when I begin to think deep about the situation of the youth in our country today, And whenever I've had this struggle song being sung, whether it is by students themselves, or even sometimes you will hear it being sung by political parties, it kind of captures the spirit that I find that the youth today, they are challenged. Kubi, they are unemployed. Kubi, they go to bed on empty stomachs. Kubi, but the sense in which even in the midst of hopelessness and in the midst of despair, they continue. They not giving up. I would like to refer you, as I think about the songs of struggle, there's a brilliant thesis, a doctoral thesis in psychology that I came across that reflects on struggle songs and multi-dimensional Black identities. I think it's a doctoral in KZN by Thabo Sikesa. So I found his analysis as I was thinking about this song of struggle. I found his analysis very helpful, reflecting on the use of liberation songs used in the liberation struggles in Latin America. Pring Mill argued that these types of songs can also be understood to be songs of both struggle and hope. So there's a sense in which this song for me, Kubi, Siyaya, it carries that message, the contradictions, the struggle, but then there's also hope. And then in his analysis again of Pring Mill, then there's element of conscientization when we talk or when we even listen to these songs, these struggle songs, then there's an element where we get conscientized, because then they seem to ring very true with the reported experiences of singing these songs by students, activists. In this study, he writes, and then he writes in this context, conscientization, loosely translated, refers then to the important role of songs in terms of their ability to draw people's attention to the moral aspects of the messages raised in the songs and the revolutionary struggle at large. So what I'm thinking about is well captured by his analysis of the songs of struggle. Kubi, Siyaya. Noba Siyaya, Noba Kubi Siyaya, Noba Besibulala Siyaya. It is a rendition then that I will attempt to use with your help to emphasize my point this morning. Now, firstly, in order to contribute with humility and responsibility, it must be stated perhaps at the very introductory stage of this presentation that the understanding of theology espoused in this presentation is that of a theology of liberation, which is different from the understanding of theology as salvation, as in Orthodox theology in particular. Liberation is not subsumed under notions of salvation. Liberation, according to Emily Townes, means unpacking the gospel into living. So this kind of theology, that it is through the lenses that I try to look at where we are as churches and even the society as far as the youth are concerned. It does not only focus on the spiritual realm and preoccupation of taking people to heaven, but it engages human struggle, oppression, suffering, and exploitation, among other things. It is grounded in an understanding of the gospel, whose mandate is to eradicate that human struggle and systems of injustice. Thus, a theology of liberation whose core value is consciousness, according to so many theologians in the country and abroad. I put there a quote, I will not read, how Gustavo Gutierrez defines the theology of liberation. But then as we move, I just want to bring your attention then to what Enrique Dussel says about this kind of philosophy or this kind of theology. For him, above all, the reality out of which such a theology emerged, it is today. So in as much as we would trace back this kind of theologies to many years ago, but there's a sense in which when we begin to analyze our society today, when we begin to analyze our faith communities and ourselves, then there are more pressing issues than ever before in this continuous and maddening spiral of underdevelopment, the misery, the poverty, the exploitation of the oppressed of the global periphery in Latin America, Africa, or Asia, of the dominated classes, of the marginalized, of the poor in Center and the African Americans, Hispanics, Tex, and others, he says, to whom we would have to add women as sexual objects, the useless age gathered in misery or in asylums, the exploited and the drugged youth, the unemployed youth, the silenced popular and national cultures, and all the rest of the earth, as Fanon put it, who wait and struggle for liberation. Now, Kubi, Siyaya is a cry for life. There's a statement that I found that resonates with the message of Kubi Siyaya, the message of struggle and hope. Cry for life, the statement says, for the peasants who produce our food but go to bed with empty stomach, for workers who keep the wheel turning but carry heavy burdens on their backs. Cry for life, for the courage, for the hope, for the forest, for the stream. Bodies may die, spirit never dies. In our struggle, we burst in songs. As a new day dawns, we will shout in joy. Now, this statement, it was drafted by the Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologians in their third General Assembly held in Nairobi, Kenya. And it must understanding that it should be one of the most important texts that we use to benchmark any progress that our democratic dispensations have made, especially with regard to the conditions of the youth. Now, this statement, it offers some sort of a reading of the times, and it helps us to locate the efficacy of Africa's anti-life forces, systems, and problems. So many anti-life forces and systemic problems continue to traumatize our continent and country. So this statement in its entirety, it exposes oppressive systems where many are victims of a world power system that uses people for labor, yet those people struggle to make ends meet. Their cry for life is raised from the midst of misery and from within situations in which the force of death are rampant. It is a cry for material conditions and speaks to structures that keep people at the same trenches of destitution. So I just want to highlight two sentiments that I find important in this statement. So the cry of the third world is not a passive cry of resignation to the realities of death. It is a strident witness to the persistence of life. The cry of life is not a cry of despair, sorrow, and hopelessness or grief, but it is a cry that denies victory to torture, detainment, starvation, and military might. It is a cry for bread. It is a cry for rice, water, land, housing, jobs, healthcare. Kubi, Kubi, Siyaya. And from a liberation perspective, then this cry is a loud voice. It is raised from the midst of misery and from within situations in which people are face to face with death. Surely a cry of life, life in its fullness. But importantly, this statement then says there are currents that inspire vision for a new way of living. These currents include, amongst other things, the struggles of women, the movements of Black people, indigenous movements, religions, Hispanic, and ecological movements. So the resistance of young people and their anger, the resistance of women and their struggles, for instance, against patriarchy, including all these currents that inspire a new vision of living. They express hope that denies death and affirms life. Kubi, Kubi, Siyaya, no matter what. Which is why then I have been challenged as to how then are we, our theologies perhaps have failed the youth. So one of the critiques that has been dominant in theological spaces when we begin to think about the shifts and the trends in theologies, it is whether the kind of theologies that we embody, whether it is through our doctrines in our churches, or whether it is through our curriculums in theological education, or whether it is even in how we live, whether this kind of theology it is life affirming, whether this kind of theology, it is a theology that is able to listen to the cries of the people, to listen to the cries of the youth. So some scholars then, when they talk about traditional theologies that we know, traditional theologies that we've always known and we've always understood, which shape most of the theologies of our church. So there's always a critique of whether our theology is not abstract, whether our theology is not the theology that only makes us as churches to focus on salvation and to focus on only going to heaven. So the question then would be, if our theologies that we are grounded on are theologies that are only focused on the metaphysical, on abstract issues, then how do we begin to be theologies or even churches that are able to hear and listen to the cry of life? Because the cry of life is here and now. The cry of life is not a cry that demands that we park our sorrows, we park our fears, because then we know that in heaven we will be comforted as we have been made to believe. So there's that going critique between traditional theologies and other theologies that have emerged. There's theologies, contextual theologies, there's feminist theologies, liberation theologies, public theologies that in a way try to bridge the gap between the abstract, between the metaphysics and what people are crying for here and now. There's been proposals, for instance, on theologies of life that do not only focus on the non-believer, but theologies that are premised on the concrete experiences of oppressed people, oppressed Africans, women, youth, amongst other things. A theology perhaps that we should be thinking about, which is comprehensive and holistic, which is not only concerned with engaging in analysis for academic purposes, but rather committed to the transformation of oppressive situation. Now, perhaps it is still a question on how in this audience we understand our theologies and how we believe that these theologies relate to everyday living situations and experiences of our people. But then the question continues as I wrestle with this question as then to whether the youth, as I said earlier, of 1976 has failed the youth of 2023. I make special reference to the youth of 1976 because it is them that went to the streets in 1976 on the June 16 to fight for justice, to fight for freedom, to fight for liberation. So it is, in my opinion, the same youth then that we have today in leadership position, whether it is in government or any other sector. Now, the question for me is, have they not failed the youth of 2023? If, for instance, we look at Fees Must Fall. Fees Must Fall started in October 2015, but then we saw Fees Must Fall again in 2021, and the protests and the cries, it is still the same issue, the issue of access to higher education, the exclusion of poor students who had debt and could not register for academic year, among other things. Russell Botman observes that the World Bank has seen tertiary education as vital to the development and further observes its impact on economic growth, elimination of poverty, empowerment, and transformation. So to deny anyone access to education, it is to deny them human development, the economy, and transformation. Hadley and Kobo, they are said that seemingly the abrupt appearance of student movements on university campus emerged out of a context marked by socio-economic injustices, racism, systematic inequalities in post-apartheid South Africa. There have been reported cases on how men who hold positions of power demand sexual favors from women who are seeking employment. An incident worth mentioning, which dominated our screens in 2020, is that I make an example of one that was televised of Mr. Malisela, an employee of the East London campus who was working and heading human resources. Now, according to Checkpoint, 10 women had accused him of sexual harassment. An interview done on Youth Day was with Amanda Daizane, who shared how she was dismissed from Buffalo City after refusing to continue having sex with her ex-boss. An ANC Women's League representative at a protest against the accused Sibilimili observed how, I quote, Amanda is representing many young women in this country who, when they leave home to look for work as graduates, are told to drop their panties before getting the job. And also, if we look at racism in South Africa, which is still a problem, if we look at exactly what happens in institutions of higher learning. So the question then for the youth is, what happened to the Freedom Charter? The people shall govern, it says. All national groups shall have equal rights. The people shall share in the country's wealth. The land shall be shared among those who work in it. All shall be equal before the law. All shall enjoy equal human rights. There shall be work and security, it says. The doors of learning and of culture shall be opened. There shall be house, security, and comfort. There shall be peace and friendship. Kubi, Kubi, Siyaya. Now, the youth of 1976, have they not failed the youth of 2023 when we still have unemployed graduates? So this spirit of Kubi, Kubi, Siyaya, one sees when you drive around in Gauteng, perhaps even in other provinces, where you find graduates picketing in street corners, holding placards to display their qualifications. That's their only hope. They've been to so many interviews. They've knocked into all sorts of doors, but because they try to maintain a bit of their dignity, they would rather bypass the sleeping with this men part to stand in the streets, to try and market themselves with their CVs and with their qualifications, not yet uhuru. And also, if you look at what is happening currently in the country, now that the government and leadership have decided to open doors of learnership and internships, there's a ceiling. Because now we are told, even the policies and everything, that if you are above 35, you do not qualify. So the question then, if the current government is serious about youth, why would they appoint a 70-year-old as Minister of Youth? Youth, you're on your own. Kubi, Kubi. God was here. Corruption, which has become the order of the day when I look at the youth of 1976. Corruption means nothing but delayed progress, deferred dreams, failed promises, not yet uhuru. Have we contributed as the church? Have we failed the youth? Is the question that I'm posing to the audience of church leaders and myself. For instance, let's think about how we use the Bible translations. How do you say to an unemployed graduate? And for instance, when you even take it further, most of the unemployed graduates, they come from homes where sometimes they had to sell everything they have in order to take them to school, in order for them to have these qualifications. Because then for them, then it was some hope that if we take this one to school, they will break the cycle of poverty and the struggles that we have at home. So we have people who come, most of our people, they come from such contexts. Now the question is, what is it that perhaps we do? In a conversation with one of the youth members, he could not understand that us as pastors, in the midst of this struggle, in the midst of them selling their souls because they need to put bread on their table, but the sense in which sometimes we carelessly use the Bible to actually affirm such messages. So how do you say to a struggling person, it will be okay in heaven? How do you say, do not worry about today, we have a home in heaven? So it is a question that I'm posing. You could think of many other biblical verses, perhaps that we use as churches and as pastors, perhaps without even knowing it, but putting people where they are, to keep them where they are. The dilemma, for instance, we are all pastors here. So our systems in the church, that there's either, depending on any of the tradition that we come from, there's tithing, there's pledges, and there's stewardship in the church. And it is our responsibility to teach about stewardship. It is our responsibility to make sure that ministry is sustained. But then the contradictions are too deep for me. When I think about this young lady whose body has been a sacrifice, because this lady who's a member in my church had to sleep in order to get a job. How, in some cases, some women who go through that kind of system, they end up as sex workers. Some cases, some of women who go through that without, it has not been their choice. They go through that system, and some they contract HIV and AIDS. Some they resort to substance abuse. Now the question for me, how do we as church continue then to demonize? We speak, we stand in podiums and in pulpits. We remind people about their sinfulness because they are HIV positive. We do not know what happened. Our theologies are theologies that demonize sex work. We do not even know where they have been. Our theologies, we demonize substance abuse. We're not even thinking about alternative ways of actually trying to be life affirming, but we are always on the end of judgmental and because for us everything is sin. We are all going to heaven. We do not care about what is happening to people. Those are the kind of contradictions that I would like us to reflect on, think deep when we think about our youth, power and leadership. I often hear statements about how the youth is the future. And I'm going to say it often, this is said by leaders who do not want to let go of power. You are the future. Don't worry. You are the future. There's fourth industrial revolution today. There's all sorts of changes, but we are packing the youth. Do youth, young people have voices in our churches? Or do we, as pastors, speak on their behalf? Do we know everything to a point where we just pray for them? Is it enough to pray for such things, such atrocities, such failures in our systems? Is it enough to pray them away? It is a question that I'm also wrestling with. I think I'm concluding now. Just two things that I want to talk about. The hope. I said earlier, this song, this struggle song, is looking into struggle and hope, even if it is difficult, even if Kubi, no matter what, but we press on. And I found this quote by Nick Barnes very helpful. He says, if you only carry one thing throughout your entire life, let it be hope. Let it be hope that better things are always ahead. Let it be hope that you can get through even the toughest of times. Let it be hope that you are stronger than any challenge that comes your way. Let it be hope that you are exactly where you're meant to be right now, and that you are on the path to where you are meant to be. Because during these times, he says, hope will be the very thing that carries you through. And then also, Moltmann, I found helpful because he says hope, which is an inseparable companion of faith. When this hope is taken away, however eloquently or elegantly we discourse concerning faith, we are convicted of having none. Hope is nothing else than the expectation of those things which faith has believed to have been truly promised by God. Thus, faith believes God to be true. Hope awaits the time when this truth shall be manifested. Faith believes that He is our Father. Hope anticipates that He will ever show Himself to be a Father towards us. Faith believes that eternal life has been given to us. Hope anticipates that it will sometime be revealed. Faith is the foundation upon which hope rests. Hope nourishes and sustains faith. Kubi, Siyaya. Thank you.